Welcome to a deep dive into the British Invasion. We're not just listing bands today. We're going to explore why and how this musical movement took over America. Using excerpts from the British Invasion, how the UK took over the American charts. Get ready for some aha moments. We're going to uncover the roots of the invasion, how American artists responded, and the legacy that lives on today.
It's fascinating how this musical phenomenon wasn't a sudden explosion, but a gradual buildup, a back and forth between the US and the UK.
A musical conversation of sorts.
Exactly. Imagine the 1950s. American rock and roll is exploding with Elvis, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard electrifying audiences. Their music crossed the Atlantic, and guess who is listening? Young British musicians, soaking it all up.
So these future invaders were actually huge fans. That's a cool twist.
Absolutely. They were absorbing those American influences and adding their own British flavor. Skiffle music became really popular. It was a blend of American folk, jazz, and blues with a British twist. Think of it as the training ground for many British invasion bands.
Skiffle. Interesting. What did that sound like?
Well, imagine a mix of catchy melodies and foot-stomping rhythms, often played on homemade instruments like washboards and tea-chest basses. Lonnie Donegan was a king of skiffle. He even had a hit with a stiffle version of an American folk song, Rock Island Line. You can hear those American roots right there.
Wow. So American music was like the seed, and skiffle was the sprout. And from that came the British invasion.
You got it. It's a beautiful example of how music travels and evolves. And that brings us to a pivotal moment. February 9th, 1964. The Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. Over 73 million people tuned in. That's a Super Bowl-sized audience.
Beatlemania was already in full swing across the pond, but about to hit America like a tidal wave. They were fresh, energetic, with those signature harmonies.
And their music was different from what was popular in America at the time. They took those American rock and roll influences and added their own British songwriting flair, resulting in something completely new and exciting.
They had those catchy melodies, yes, but there was also this lyrical depth that was starting to emerge.
Right. Their earlier hits were full of youthful energy, but you can hear the songwriting evolving. And then, boom, they achieved something unprecedented. They held all top 5 spots on the Billboard Hot 100.
Talk about making a statement. But the British invasion was way more than just the Beatles, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of the British invasion as this incredible wave. And riding alongside the Beatles were bands like the Rolling Stones, bringing a whole different flavor of rock.
These were the bad boys.
Ah.
With that raw, bluesy energy that felt a little dangerous.
Exactly. While the Beatles were charming their way into America's hearts, the Rolling Stones, under the guidance of their savvy manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, cultivated this raw, rebellious image. It was a brilliant strategy that set them apart.
Oldham really understood how to market that rebellious spirit, especially to a youth culture that was starting to question the status quo.
Their music was a deliberate contrast to the polished pop of the time. Think Satisfaction. It's raw, it's gritty, it's full of frustration. And it became an anthem for a generation.
They tapped into something real. And it's no surprise. Considering their deep blues influences, they weren't shy about their love for American blues legends like Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry.
Oh, they wore those influences on their sleeves, but they also injected their own unique energy and attitude. They took the blues and made it dangerous, exciting, and undeniably cool.
And then there was The Who, bringing another dimension to the invasion. With their explosive performances, it wasn't just about the music, it was about the spectacle.
They were known for smashing their instruments on stage, which definitely grabbed attention, but beyond the theatrics, they were pushing boundaries musically too.
I've always loved their energy. My generation still sounds as fresh and relevant today as it did back then. It's an anthem for every generation that wants to break free and make their own mark on the world.
Pete Townshend's songwriting tackled social issues head-on. Think about My Generation, a song that became a rallying cry for a generation questioning the world around them. They even introduced the concept of the rock opera with Tommy, a groundbreaking work that blended rock music with storytelling.
It's amazing how they could be both explosive and thoughtful at the same time.
They were a unique force, blending hard rock with pop art influences. And those incredibly thought-provoking lyrics, they carved their own path within the invasion. They weren't afraid to be different, to experiment. And that's what made them so captivating.
So you've got these British bands shaking things up in America.
Yeah.
But what about the American music scene? Do they just sit back and watch it all unfold?
Not at all. The American response was more like, game on. It wasn't about being defeated, but about pushing their own creativity even further.
So it was like this friendly rivalry that pushed everyone to be better.
Exactly. The British invasion raised the bar for everyone. Take the Beach Boys, for example. Brian Wilson was completely blown away by the Beatles' Rubber Soul album. It was so different, so innovative. He was determined to create something just as groundbreaking, and that's how Pet Sounds was born.
Whoa. So one of America's most iconic albums was actually inspired by the Beatles. That's wild.
It's true. And then, get this, Pet Sounds went on to influence the Beatles, S.G.T. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Talk about a full circle moment. It's a beautiful example of how this musical exchange pushed both British and American artists to new heights.
It's amazing how music can inspire such creativity and innovation across borders. And let's not forget Bob Dylan, another American icon who was deeply inspired by the electric sound of British rock.
Absolutely. Dylan's move from folk to electric music was a huge turning point in American music. He was listening to what those British bands were doing with electric guitars, and he wanted to explore those sounds, too. It was a bold move that didn't sit well with some of his folk purist fans, but it was a game changer for rock music.
So his invasion wasn't about British bands dominating. It was about this incredible exchange of ideas that pushed music forward on both sides of the Atlantic.
It was like this electrifying energy that sparked creativity everywhere. And remember, this was all happening during a time of major social and political upheaval in America. The counterculture movement, the civil rights movement, Vietnam War protests, the music of the Beatles, the Stones, the Who. It all became the soundtrack for a generation yearning for change.
It's fascinating how music can capture the spirit of a time, become this unifying force for people going through these massive cultural shifts.
You're right. It wasn't just about the music. It was the whole image. British fashion, from those sharp mod suits to the swinging London scene, had a huge influence on American youth. It represented a break from tradition, a new kind of cool, and American youth embraced it wholeheartedly. These bands weren't just musicians. They were style icons, trendsetters.
And don't forget those haircuts. The Beatles' mop tops caused a sensation. Parents weren't too thrilled, but teenagers loved it.
It's funny to think about now. But those haircuts became a symbol of rebellion, a way to visually express a break from the norm. And it wasn't just in America. This was a global phenomenon. Kids all over the world, Japan, Australia, Brazil, were tuning in to this new sound, embracing the fashion, the attitude, the whole package.
It's incredible how music can transcend language and borders, connecting people on such a deep level. But let's get back to the music itself. We've talked about the cultural impact. But what about the sounds that defined the British invasion? What made their music so unique and influential?
The music is where it all starts.
Right.
It's this amazing blend of influences. Remember how we talked about those early British musicians being inspired by American rock and roll? Well, they didn't just copy it. They took those influences, filtered them through their own British experiences, and created something entirely new. It's like taking a recipe, adding your own unique spices, and creating a whole new dish.
So it was like a musical evolution, taking those American roots and giving them a British twist.
Exactly. You had the Beatles with their incredibly catchy melodies and tight harmonies, but also this incredible songwriting depth. They could write songs that were both fun and meaningful.
Like Yesterday. Such a simple, beautiful melody, yet it's filled with this deep sense of longing and nostalgia. And then you have Hey Jude, another timeless classic that's both uplifting and emotionally powerful. There's a reason why these songs are still so beloved today. They tap into something universal.
And then there's the Rolling Stones with their raw, bluesy energy that was just so different from anything else at the time. Their music was gritty, sexy, dangerous. It tapped into a rebellious energy.
Satisfaction is the perfect example. You can hear the frustration, the yearning for something more. It became an anthem for a whole generation.
And let's not forget the Who. Who brought a different kind of energy, this explosive power and raw emotion.
I've always loved their energy.
Okay.
My generation still sounds as fresh and relevant today as it did back then. It's an anthem for every generation that wants to break free and make their own mark on the world.
They pushed the boundaries with their powerful instrumentals and those thought-provoking lyrics about teenage disillusionment and questioning authority. They weren't afraid to make noise, to challenge the status quo, and that made them incredibly exciting.
It's amazing how the Who could be both explosive and insightful at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
They were innovators too, especially the Beatles.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to studio recording. Think about Street Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It wasn't just a collection of great songs, it was a sonic adventure. The Beatles were pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the studio, using techniques like multi-tracking and tape loops to create these wild, psychedelic soundscapes.
I heard that George Martin their producer, played a huge role in their studio experimentation.
He did. He was a classically trained musician and arranger, and he brought a whole new level of sophistication to their recordings. He wasn't afraid to experiment with them, to try new things, and that really pushed the Beatles to be even more creative in the studio.
It's amazing how those studio innovations still influence music today. So many artists are still experimenting with sounds and pushing boundaries, thanks in part to what the Beatles did back then.
It's true. And it all goes back to that spirit of the British invasion, this incredible energy, creativity, and willingness to break the mold. They didn't just create great music, they changed the way music was made.
It's amazing how the British invasion wasn't just a moment in time. It was a catalyst for a whole new era of musical creativity and innovation. And that leads us to our final question. What about today? Which bands or artists do you think are carrying the torch of the British invasion?
That's a question that could spark a whole other deep dive. There's no single right answer because the influence of that era is so vast and multifaceted. It's like trying to trace the branches of a massive tree. The roots are deeply embedded in the British invasion, but the branches reach out in so many different directions.
So it's not about finding bands that sound exactly like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. It's more about recognizing that spirit of innovation and creativity that they embodied.
Exactly. It's about artists who aren't afraid to break boundaries, experiment with sounds, and push the limits of what music can be. And you can hear echoes of that British invasion spirit in so many different genres today. Take punk rock, for example. Bands like The Clash and the Ramones, they channeled that same raw energy and rebellious spirit that fueled the original invasion.
It's like that punk energy is a direct descendant of those early Rolling Stones gigs, where the music was raw, the attitude was defiant, and the audience was just wild.
Exactly. And then you have the more introspective, melodic side of things, like indie pop bands, such as Belle and Sebastian and the Smiths. They might not have that same swagger as the Stones, but they share that gift for crafting beautiful melodies and lyrics that resonate deeply with listeners.
It's like they took the melodic brilliance of the Beatles and gave it a more introspective, sometimes melancholic twist.
And then you have artists like Radiohead and Arcade Fire, who are constantly pushing sonic boundaries, experimenting with sounds, and creating these expansive, atmospheric soundscapes. They're like the modern-day heirs to the Beatles' studio experimentation.
It's fascinating how that spirit of sonic exploration is still alive, and well today.
And what's even more exciting is that this influence isn't limited by genre or geography. You can hear traces of the British invasion in music from all over the world, from U2 in Ireland to the Killers in America, and countless others. It's a testament to the lasting power of that era, how it ignited a musical revolution that continues to inspire artists across generations and continents.
It's like that spark of creativity and innovation that the British invasion ignited is still burning bright today.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the music itself. It's about the attitude, the style, the whole cultural phenomenon. You see it in how artists today create these immersive experiences with their music, using visuals, fashion, and storytelling, much like those British invasion bands did.
It's like they understood that music is more than just sound. It's about creating a whole world that people can connect with.
And that's what makes exploring the legacy of the British invasion so rewarding. It's not about finding carbon copies, but recognizing those threads of influence, those echoes of innovation and creativity that continue to shape the music we love today.
So as you listen to your favorite bands, think about those connections. Can you hear hints of the Beatles' harmonies, the Stones' grit, or the Who's explosive energy? It's like a musical treasure hunt, uncovering those hidden influences that make the music so compelling.
And that's the beauty of music. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads, a constant evolution of sounds and ideas. The British invasion was a pivotal moment in that evolution, a moment that continues to reverberate through the music we hear today.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the British invasion. We've explored its history, the music, the cultural impact, and how its influence continues to resonate in music today.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it's inspired you to revisit some of those classic albums, explore new artists, and appreciate the power of music to shape our world.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep exploring, keep listening, and keep those musical connections alive. Until next time.